Here we go. Getting into some 3D AutoCAD here today. Trevor, good morning. We're going to be jumping right into it here. So this is the first um, kind of leap into the 3D realm of AutoCAD here. It's really not that scary. Probably mentioned that already. It's really not that scary or that different than what you're used to actually messing with in AutoCAD as of right now. But what I'm going to do is open up a blank AutoCAD file here so we can take a look at some 3D commands to kind of dig into here. There is a supplemental document that does have like the basic 2D commands that you will use quite frequently, the basic 3D commands that you're going to use quite frequently as you get into 3D modeling, and then your plotting commands that you're going to use all the time too. If you don't have access to that, please let me know. We'll get you access to that. But today what I'm going to do is kind of go through um, what these 3D commands are, how to get to them, what they do, and kind of like how you can use them on a daily basis here. So first starting out, if you haven't already noticed, in the bottom right corner of your AutoCAD screen, you're going to see there's a gear down at the bottom. That's your workspace switching, which is just a different setup that you can switch on and off. So when you first start AutoCAD, you're going to be on drafting and annotation, which is a 2D geared sort of tool palette or a toolbar at the top of your screen. Works really good for 2D drawing, 2D plotting. When you get into making 3D models, though, you're going to probably want to be over here on that settings gear. You're probably going to want to be on 3D modeling. Now, there's also a 3D basics toolbar as well that you're more than welcome to use. I personally don't use it myself because I really don't use the toolbars that often, but when I do, if I'm modeling, I'm going to be using 3D modeling instead of 3D basics. So the commands are basically the same. 3D modeling is going to have some more intricate ones though, whereas 3D basics will be kind of like the slimmed down version of that. So when you first jump into your 3D toolbar, let's take a look at what we've got up here. So we've got several different things to look at. Some of the things that I'm going to bring up are going to be either similar or very much the same as what you're used to seeing for 2D. So with that being said, that's things like your mirror command, your rotate command, those sorts of things are going to be very, very similar to what you're already used to using in 2D. Now, the first part of this new toolbar that we're jumping into here, you can see there are, let's see, up here in the modeling area here, there's some drop downs. A lot of times you'll see people using box to draw things like ribs or different components of a desk or an island or whatever they're working on. There's other things too that you're probably going to need too, like cylinder, of course, is going to draw a cylinder. Cone's going to draw a cone, etc. These are all different things that you can use. However, I would say basically like what I've used in the past, 8 to 9 years I've been here is pretty much box and cylinder are the two main ones that I'm going to be using quite a bit. All right, so after that, you'll see that there's a section here called extrude. If you click on the drop down for that, you'll see a few other things here like loft, revolve, and sweep. You might actually need to use all four of these throughout your time here. From what I've seen, sweep is very heavily used. Extrude is also very heavily used. Loft and revolve, not quite as much, but that doesn't mean that you won't need them. I actually have used these a lot, just not as frequently as the other two here. To the right of that, you'll see that there is something called polysolid, which I really don't use a lot of, but that is a way to quickly draw walls. If you really wanted to use that tool, you could. Then you have press pull. Press pull, what it will do is it works a lot like extrude. If you have two-dimensional lines on in an AutoCAD file, you can use the press pull command to take those lines and create three-dimensional objects off of them, kind of like what's shown in the graphic here. Extrude does work in a very similar way. So these two do kind of go hand in hand. If you've used anything like Google SketchUp in the past, there is another command in there called press pull or something along the same verbiage there that does exactly the same thing. Um, there are other areas here that we're not really going to talk a lot about because we don't use mesh modeling here at onsite, but you can skip over this portion of it for right now. Solid editing over here. There's a few things that you're going to want to take note of. There's a command called union. Union, what it will do is it will take two objects and it will combine them together and create one part out of two or three or multiple parts. That is kind of a unique command there that you probably use quite often. Subtract works very similar. Actually, it works the opposite. So where union will combine two objects, subtract will remove an object from another object here. So like object one being that wall, object two being the door that you see in that graphic, they're using that to remove that from the wall. So subtract will remove an object, union will combine or add two objects together. Then you get into other ones like intersect and interfere. Intersect does kind of like a combination of the two, where it will take two parts and it will only give you the part that the two parts intersect at. That's kind of unique in its own sense. You may not use it that often, but you probably will need to use it occasionally. And then the same thing with interfere. Interfere does the exact same thing. However, interfere is used mainly to check for it's usually used to check for any sort of interference or clashing between two parts. Usually more mechanically geared, like if you're a mechanical drafter, you're probably going to use this more often, but we do use it here too. So that's interfere. We'll talk about that and how to use it here shortly. You go down the list, you got slice. Slice is a command that lets you essentially, well, it's kind of like trim, if you want to think about it like that. So when you're working in 2D, you'll use trim to cut something back to a certain line. Slice works exactly the same way. The only difference is instead of having a line you're trimming to, you actually have to draw that line while using the slice command. And we'll talk about that here as well here shortly. Again, this one you probably won't use, but if you have a 3D object, you can increase the thickness of it, whether it be a surface model or a just a general part. You can increase the thickness of it using that command. You can also decrease the thickness of it using that command too. And again, we can talk about that later. All right, moving on to the right even further here, we've got a few other things here. So let's say you did have a mesh model and you needed something like you needed to see the edges of that model, because in AutoCAD, when you have a mesh model, it doesn't allow you to see those edges. So you have a command here called extract edges. You can also use this on 3D objects too. Probably won't use it very often here, but it's something that allows you to generate 2D lines off of a 3D object. So we'll talk about that more too. Probably won't use it here, so I probably won't spend a lot of time on that. Extrude faces kind of works like press pull and extrude. It just allows you to select a face of an object and increase the thickness of that object by clicking and dragging your mouse. So not really a lot there. Separate is kind of unique, and you probably will use this one at least. So if you have more than one object that is unioned or linked together, so in the graphic here, you can see there are two parts there in yellow. Those two parts are unioned together. Even though they're not touching, they're still grouped together. To be able to separate those, you can use this separate command that's up here and actually space or take those apart to be individual parts from there on out. So kind of unique in its own way. You got some other ones here like shell. Shell is pretty cool. Shell will allow you to take an object and it will allow you to, like it could be a solid object like a cube, and you can turn it into a hollowed out object. So let's say you were drawing like maybe like a steel tube like a 4x4 steel tube and you wanted the wall thickness of that tube to be 1/8 of an inch, well, you could use the shell command to be able to hollow it out and tell AutoCAD, hey, I want the walls to be 1/8 of an inch. It will automatically do what's called shelling, which is just taking the object and the solid object and making it a hollowed out object is all. And we'll talk about that more. It's kind of confusing to explain it without actually seeing it, so we'll talk about that some more. Further to the right, you're going to see some commands you're going to already be familiar with. So you've got polyline, you've got arcs, you've got splines, lines, circles, etc. None of that stuff has changed here, but there is an additional one that you have not seen yet, which is 3D polyline. 3D polyline will allow you to draw a polyline in 3 dimensions versus 2. So that's new, something you haven't messed with yet, and we can play around with that here shortly. All right. Over here, I don't really use these a whole lot, but we can talk about, well, actually I do use these. So you're used to using the mirror command in 2D. There is also a 3D mirror command here. The only difference between the 2D and the 3D mirror is that 3D mirror wants you to select 3 points on a plane. So looking at the graphic they have here, that kind of explains what's going on. They have taken the yellow part and they're flipping it or mirroring it and to make that orange part on the right. How they're doing that is they're taking, they've selected the yellow part, that's step 1, and then step 2, 3, and 4, and they selected 3 points on that plane. So they're drawing an imaginary plane between the 2 parts. And then once they've drawn that imaginary plane, AutoCAD will flip that object or mirror that object over that imaginary line that they drew. So not a whole lot different than 2D mirror, except for you have a 3rd point in the Z direction instead of just the X and the Y direction that you're mirroring across. So not a lot that's changing there. You also have something called 3D move, which I don't really use a lot of. You can still use your regular move command for most things in 3D. There's your regular move again, copy, trim, fillet, all these things that you have been using in the past. 3D rotate is slightly different than the regular rotate. Again, the only difference here is that it's unlocked the Z direction. So that way you can rotate something on the X, the Y, or the Z plane. The regular rotate will only allow you to rotate items on the X or the Y plane. So this one is slightly different in that aspect, but overall use of that command has not changed much. And we'll talk about that too. Got 3D align, which is kind of like the align command, pretty much the same thing. I don't really know why they have 2 commands for it because it does the exact same thing. You got erase, 3D scale, regular scale. So again, a lot of these are going to be very, very repetitive from the 2D basics to your now 3D toolbar here. When we get into modeling and plotting, there are things called section planes. Section planes are a way to create a section view off of a 3D model. So those are pretty neat. We'll talk about how to use those here shortly. It's kind of just like when you use the slice command, which we haven't really talked about just yet, but when you use the slice command, you pick a couple of points on an area that you want to cut through the object. The slice command will actually cut through the object, where the section plane will not actually cut through it, but it will draw an imaginary plane and also allow you to create a 2D view off of that to be able to draw a section through a 3D object like this. All right. The rest of these, I won't really get into these very much right now. There are going to be some items here that you will be messing with, like the view cube, for example, which we got to talk about that too. Or here, this one, this area I do use quite frequently. This allows you to change the direction you're looking at an object. So by default in AutoCAD, your top-down view is always going to be your XY plane. But you actually can change that. So if you've worked in anything like SolidWorks or Inventor in the past, you know that you can draw on other planes. And if you have had that experience, that's where these come into play. All right, moving on from there, you're going to see visual styles under view. Visual styles are just different ways to view your 3D model in your model space. So by default, anytime you open AutoCAD, it's probably always going to be on 2D wireframe. That is the fastest visual style that there is in AutoCAD. That doesn't mean that it's the best thing for everything though, because when you're 3D modeling, it does help to have a solid view of that model to be able to edit it and make sure that things are lining up to where they need to line up. That's where these come in. So 2D wireframe is always going to be your basic AutoCAD top-down sort of like just line work view. You have other ones though, like conceptual, which I do use quite frequently, and shaded with edges. Both of these here are used quite a bit. These allow you to see the object in 3D, but also see the edges of that object. If you want to, when we get into modeling, if you want to mess around with these and see what they look like, you're more than welcome to start playing with these. Realistic, you don't mess with really unless you're doing renderings. And we don't do a lot of renderings here, but I can always show you how to do that too. So visual styles, again, just recapping, it's just a way to view your model in a different sort of like, it doesn't affect your drawing at all. It just affects the way that you're viewing it in your model space over here. All right, moving on from there, you still have your layers over on the right. That has not changed, but we'll talk about, there are like standard 3D layers that are pre-set up for you that we'll be messing with here. You still have your group, ungroup, etc. Really not a lot has changed there. You will notice there are other tabs up here though too, which also have a lot of these same commands just displayed out differently. If you prefer seeing one of these other toolbars instead, that's fine. You can use these instead. I do cycle between these two pretty frequently myself because there are commands in here that I'm more used to finding this way or this way. We will not be really getting into surface or mesh modeling, so those are more like organic modeling for sculpting or strange shapes that aren't really something that you really deal with in this millwork industry that much. So we don't really mess with those. Visualize, this is more for rendering purposes. We can talk about that later. I could do a whole segment on rendering. We won't really be needing that for our work here at Onsite, but I could still show how to do that in case you ever do need it. The rest of these, we don't really use a lot of, and so I'm probably not going to really get into explaining a lot of these here. But for the most part, the important thing to take away is that you're going to be pretty much using your home, solid, and well, pretty much home and solid toolbars up here, which again, if you need to get to those, they are down here in the bottom right settings gear under 3D modeling. All right, let's mess with some 3D commands that we've got here. So just seeing what we can do. Let's go and let's start by looking at our view cube here. So right now it's the view square because that's what you're seeing right now. To actually get into using the view cube, if you want to, you can see if I hold my mouse over parts of this, you can see that it's allowing me to highlight certain corners of this cube. So if I click on this corner, my AutoCAD is going to turn into an isometric view, which is allowing me to both see X, Y, and Z instead of just X and Y. That's your different grid planes here. So you're seeing X, Y, and Z at this time. You can rotate your view cube however you'd like to. If you need to see your model a certain way, it's easy as clicking on the view cube and changing that view just like that. You can also hold down Shift on your mouse and the middle mouse button on your mouse, Shift on your keyboard and the middle mouse button on your mouse, which will allow you to use the orbit command. That's what I'm doing here is I'm orbiting around those X, Y, and Z grid lines right here, as you can see. Other things you can do, which we did talk about in 2D, is if you hold down your middle mouse button, that allows you to pan. If you hold down that middle mouse button and just move your mouse left to right or up or down, it allows you to pan. And then scrolling your middle mouse wheel in will allow you to zoom in. Scrolling your middle mouse button towards you or backwards will be zooming out. And again, recapping, shift and middle mouse button is orbit. Lets you to freely spin around the object or the model space here. Then you have your middle mouse button by itself, which is just pan, and you got zoom in and zoom out there. So the shift and the middle mouse button, you're going to be using that a lot, so that'll become muscle memory after a while. That's just so you can see around your model space and be able to rotate around your model freely and be able to actually see everything that you need to see. So let's start modeling now. So we've got our model space here, which is just a basic blank AutoCAD. There's nothing special about this here. So right now we are still in 2D wireframe, and that's fine. I think we can switch that over though. So if you want, you can either switch that here by clicking on this icon right here, this little text box. If you want, you can also go up to your home, and under the view section of your home toolbar, you're going to see those different visual styles there as well. I'm probably going to go to conceptual here just to mess around with some 3D objects so we can kind of walk through some of this. What I would like to do is we can kind of mess around with some things just by maybe we'll draw like a real basic house or something just to have as a thing to play with here. So I'm going to start by drawing this box using the box command. That'd be like the base of my house here. So we're going to go box. And then it's going to ask you for your first corner. If you know exactly where that corner is, you can either type in those coordinates or you can snap to it if you have lines or anything out here in your model space. I don't have anything in my model space right now. So what I'm going to do is my first corner I'm going to use as 0, 0. 0, 0 is exactly where the X, Y, and Z grid meet each other. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a square, like a cube, out here in space. In this cube, I'm going to make 3 inches, and I'm going to hit my tab key, 3 inches. I'm going to hit enter now, and it'll allow me to enter in my Z direction. So I got my 3 and my 3 set. And I'm going to go 3 inches up. Again, to do that, just like when you're drawing in 2D, you start by clicking where you're starting, and then you can type in your X direction, hit tab on your keyboard, it'll allow you to enter your Y direction, and then hit enter, and it'll allow you to enter your Z or Z direction there. Once you've gotten that entered in, you should be left with a cube. I'll hold down shift and middle mouse here so I can spin around my cube here. All right, so there's my cube there. All right, and now what I'm going to do is go over to my modeling toolbar, and I'm going to pull out the, let's see, do you want pyramid or wedge? We could do, why don't we start with a box and we will turn this into a wedge here. So let's start with another box on top of our box. We're going to use that. I'm going to use the 2 corners of my square here to get this working. And this time I'm going to go 1.5 inches tall, just like this. And then if you notice, when you click on a 3D object, as long as you haven't used any of the subtract, union, or separate or any of that on the object, there are these little tiny triangles that sit at the base of that object, and that allows you to be able to modify that shape. So if I wanted to extend this out 1/2 inch on each side, I could do that here. I'm holding down shift and right, or shift and the middle mouse button again to be able to spin my model or spin my view around my model here. Again, you can use these little triangles if you need to modify an object. works really well. Um, so we've got kind of like this T shape going on. What I'm going to do here is to now sort of sculpt this into what I would say like a standard roof would look like for a little house. What you're going to do is you're going to use a couple of things you could do. You could use the slice command to do this. You could also use something called chamfer edge, which would be fine too. I'm going to use the slice command here so I can kind of show you how that works. I'll do that for one side, and the other side I'm going to do it a different way so I can kind of show you a couple different ways to edit a 3D object. So when using the slice command, so just type that in, slice here, and it's going to ask you to select the object you're going to be slicing. So I'll click on my roof, hit enter, and it's going to ask you for a start point of your slicing plane. So if I'm trimming or slicing from the top down, I can click on 2 points like that, and it'll ask me for a point on the desired side. So I'll type B, and what that did is it kind of chopped this in half or sliced that in half. So what I'm going to do is union that back together using the union command, because I really don't want that sliced that way. So what I would like to do is I'm going to start the slice command one more time, and I'm going to select my roof again, hit enter. And then if you notice at the bottom of your command prompt here, there's a bunch of different options you can pick from for the slice command. And if you want to do a slice in a direction that's not from the top down, you can use the 3-point slice for that. So you're going to go to 3 points. And then it's going to ask you the same question though, except this time it's going to ask you for 3 points instead of 2. So what you're going to do is go from the middle of that rectangular prism up there to the middle of that one. And then you're going to use this corner here, which will be sort of like the angled pitch of your roof. So it's going to ask you if you want to keep both sides. And when you're first starting out, you should probably keep both sides until you're used to using these commands. So go ahead and say keep both. So I used this point, and this point to be able to slice that. Now, because that's kind of excess and I don't really need that, I can just delete that now. All right, so a couple other ways you can go about making a slope on your roof like this is you can take a line like this using the line command and just connecting these 2 dots. And then using your press pull command to be able to remove that like this. That's another way to go about doing that. The only downside to using that method is you are going to be left with a line that's floating there in space, so you're going to want to delete that too. So that's another method of being able to remove that if you needed to. Let me go back a step so I could show you some other ways to do this too. So the one we just did was using a line connecting 2 dots, then using press pull to subtract out any geometry we didn't want. One other way you can do this is, like I said, there's a command called chamfer edge. Chamfer edge can be found in the solid toolbar at the top. Actually, they call it taper face here, but I think you can use chamfer edge too for this. Yep, chamfer edge will do the exact same thing. You type that in, hit enter, and then it's going to ask you at the bottom a couple questions. So what I'm going to go down here and do is the distance in my command prompt. All right, and we know that our roof is 1.5 inches tall. So what I'm going to do is type in 1.5, hit enter, 1.5 for distance 1 and distance 2. And then if I click on this corner here, you're going to see that it's going to, well, maybe I had that slightly off because I don't have a triangular pitch on my roof, but that's okay. So you got to have those 2 distances correct for that to work right. So that's another way to do it though too. You can use chamfer edge, you can use slice, specifically 3-point slice. You can use press pull. You can also use subtract here too. So I'll show you how to do that here in just a moment. So I'm going to go back and do the slice command on this using that 3-point option, clicking these 3 points again, just like we did previously, and then deleting the excess geometry that I don't need anymore. Okay, so let's pretend that we've got this building now. We know that it's a 3x3 structure, not very big, a house for ants. What we're going to do is I'm going to use a couple new commands we haven't touched base on yet. That would be isolate objects and unisolate or unhide objects. So we've probably used these in 2D a little bit here and there. They're going to be more relevant here in 3D as you get into your 3D modeling here. So let's isolate the base of the building. Isolate here. All right. And then you're going to go into your solid toolbar here and then go to shell. All right. So select a model that you want to shell or to hollow out. So we're going to hit that. And then it's going to ask you to remove a face if you want to remove any faces. So that would mean that if I didn't want something here on the top, I can click on that face, hit enter. And then it'll ask you for an offset distance. So maybe what I'll do is go 0.125. That'll be the thickness of the wall on the structure here that we're building. Hit exit, exit. Okay. Now you can see if I use my shift and middle mouse button, I can spin around this. You can see I have a floor in there and I have 4 walls now. Starting from a cube and working your way through that, that's how you can do that. So let's unhide. Bring back the roof that we had there. All right. Then we're going to play around with a couple other commands here just to get you familiar with these. So let's go ahead and draw a window on this structure here. So we're going to use the box again to do that. All right. And let's say we want this window to be 1 inch wide. So 1 tab. This here, this is going to be the width, or sorry, the depth of that, which can be anything in this case, because what I'm going to do with that is I'm just going to use the subtract command to remove it from the wall. So I'm going to set this at a distance of 1 as well, and then hit enter. And then I need to select a height. So maybe we'll go 1.5. All right, so I'm left with this rectangular prism. I'm going to be using the move command here to get this located exactly where I'd like to put it. So I kind of want to put this window here, move it, maybe 0.25 in. It'll be a little bit further from the corner there. And then let's raise it up a certain distance, maybe 0.75. So I use the move command to move it over from this corner, 0.25 in. Use the move command once more to move it up in the Z direction, 0.75. Now what I'm going to do is use the subtract command. So subtract. It's going to ask you to select the first object, meaning the object that you're removing something from. Then you're going to hit enter. And then you're going to want to select that shape we just built for the window. And then hit enter again. And it's going to remove that from the shape. So again, I can isolate the building, base of the building. And you can now see that you can see through that object. So what we've done is we've created a 3D model, created a secondary 3D model, and then used the subtract command to remove the second model from the first model. As you play with the subtract command, it's going to take some practice, because believe me, when I was doing this in school, it did take me a minute to figure out that you need to start with the object you are removing an object from first, and then select the object you are using to remove from. It's kind of tricky to get the hang of, but once you do, you won't forget it. So, all right, so we've got a window on that side of the house. Let's go ahead and put a door in too, because why not? We'll make this door 1 inch too. 1 inch by, we'll make this 2 inches tall. because why not? Or 2 inches deep and 2 inches tall. How about that? There we go. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing we just did on that side. Want to line it up with the corner of the building like this. Bring it in a 1/4 of an inch or 0.25. And I'm also going to raise it up 0.125 because that is the thickness of my floor in there. So now that I can do that, I can go and subtract object 1 from object 2. And there you have it. So you got a door and a window there. Let's say I wanted that window to be at the same height as that door. You know, right now it's off. So if you look at that building from the front, I click on my view cube from the front, see it's a little off. And so if you wanted to fix that, you could. Couple things you could do. You could use your press pull command, and you could click on this face of the window and bring that down to be in line with that. Let's say that wasn't the route you wanted to go. Let's say maybe you actually wanted to use a different method. So there are other ways to do that too. If you wanted to, you could use the box. You could draw a box on, oops, one sec. You could draw a box right on the underside of that window or a windowsill there. So kind of like this. And if you use that box, I just did box, clicked on that corner, which set my distance for the width and the depth. And now for the height, I can use this corner here to line that up. Of course, right now, that leaves me with an extra bit here that's not attached. So what we will do is we will use the union command to group these together. As soon as I click on both parts and hit enter, you'll see that that part goes away and it becomes one solid part. So union will group multiple objects together seamlessly to make one solid part. Press pull will be a quick way to go about doing the exact same thing. But if it's fighting you and you can't get it to work, or like, let's say you just wanted to use that other method, you definitely could. So there's a couple of 3D commands that you can use there, kind of just playing around with those to get a feel for what they do. All right. So let's see, what else have we not really gone through? We did union, we did subtract. I did a little bit of, let's see, press pull, and we used our 3D modeling shapes here a little bit too. Let's see, what else can we use for the purpose of practicing some 3D commands? So just taking a look at some of the other ones that we have up here. Sorry, just trying to think through some of these to see if there's any that would really apply to something we can use. Here is our example. We've also used shell. Subtract union. Okay. Well, maybe as far as the house goes, I think we're okay on that little example there. All right. So let's go ahead and maybe we'll use, let's see, we can use the revolve command next. I'm going to draw a tree for our yard. Again, just basic AutoCAD training command. So what you're going to do is draw that tree in 2D. I'm going to start by drawing, and maybe I'll go back to my top-down view. So if you want to do the same, click on the top of your view cube here. And you could even go back to your 2D wireframe if you'd like. It does help a little bit when it comes to drawing some of this. So let's say we had a tree here, and we're going to make the top of the tree 2 inches wide. And then we're going to take a line straight down from there. Maybe we'll make this, I don't know, like 6 inches tall. How about that? Then just like what we've done in 2D, you can use the offset command to then offset that line left and right. Just like this. All right. And then we can trim these lines back to there. And then one other thing I want to do too is kind of draw like a little base of this, maybe. I don't know. We'll do, we'll draw like a little rectangle at the bottom here. Be like a little Monopoly tree, I guess, if that's even a thing. All right, so I'm using the move command with the center midpoint there at the top of my rectangle, and I'm just going boop and boop. I'm going to bring this out. Whoops. I'm going to bring this out 0.5. Goodness gracious, it's fighting me now. Here, we'll just draw a line out like this, and then we'll extend these out to kind of give that general shape of that base that I'm trying to get. All right, so to use the revolve command, this is something that you're probably not going to use as often, but I'm going to show you this because it's something that you are going to need to know how to use in the future in case you do have a complicated shape that you need to model in 3D. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking a line straight through the middle of that tree. We're going to trim everything on one side of that line back and make sure that we don't have anything else in the way. And then I'm going to go hold down Shift and my middle mouse button to get back into my 3D view. All right. And I can also switch back to conceptual here because that might be helpful too. Okay, so let's go and start that revolve command here so we can go through how to use that. Revolve, here it is right here. You can also type that in if you'd like. Actually, before we do that, sorry, give me one quick sec. I need to show you one more thing, one more step before we get there. So when you do revolve an object or extrude an object off of 2D lines, it is always really, really important to make sure that those lines are closed polylines. So you can do that a number of ways. One really fast way to be able to get those to be closed polylines is if you type in bpoly. Bpoly will open up this dialog box in which you can click this pick points option at the top and then select your three parts. So the base, the trunk of the tree, and the top of the tree. Hit enter. Okay, and now if you hover over any of these, you can see that those are closed polylines now. So I got a half moon shape there, a rectangle, and my weird trapezoid shape here for the base. Now I'm going to use revolve, and I'm going to highlight this, and this here. Hit enter, and it's going to ask me for the start point of my axis, and the axis that you're trying to get here is going to be the dead center of which you're trying to revolve around. So imagine this being the center here. Click on that point, click on this point, and you can see as I spin my mouse around, I'm able to now draw a three-dimensional object like this. Now, if you just want it to be a full revolver free, or a full revolution of what it is that you need, you can just type in 360 for 360 degrees here and hit enter. Now we can talk about using 3D rotate and how that differs from the standard rotate command. So I'm going to type in 3D rotate, highlight all three parts of my tree, and then I'm going to use, you can see here there are three axes that are available to you, blue, and these do correspond to what's happening here too. So if you imagine blue being Z, Z is going to let you spin this tree around like it's breakdancing essentially. So it's only going to rotate it around that Z plane. Green is your Y. So if you use the green axis, it's going to spin your object in this direction here. which isn't going to be so helpful for our case. X is the red direction here, and that's the one that we're going to want to use. So I'm going to click on the red axis, and I'm going to tell it I want this to be 90 degrees up like this. One other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the union command one more time here, even though we've already gone over that, to union all of these objects together like this. So again, kind of just using this as a goofy little way to draw some objects in 3D so you can kind of get a feel for how to use these commands here. So we've used union, subtract, revolve. We've used shell. We've used box so far for 3D objects here. Let's see, what else have we used? Use 3D rotate if I hadn't already said that. Kind of use slice a little bit, showing how to do the roof. And taper edges a little bit, or chamfer edges so you can see that. Press pull. Yep, so yeah, really not too bad. So far, let me try to think if there's any other ones that I want to go through with you here to kind of show you some of the other things you can do in 3D. If for whatever reason you needed to chop your house or slice it, you could do that too. Well, we already went over slice, so I'm not going to do that again. Let's see. Interfere, we'll talk about that more later. All right, so why don't we do this? Because we're at this point, we're getting close to that hour mark. What I'm going to do is pretend that this is a drawing that I'm working on. And if this is something that I'm working on in AutoCAD for on-site here, which I mean, this is just a training example, but if this was a drawing that I'm working on here and I wanted to actually put this on paper, how you would go about making a 2D drawing off of a 3D model is you would use a command that is called flat shot, F-A or F-L-A-T-S-O or S-H-O-T, flat shot, like that. Type that in. What it's going to do is it's going to say insert as a new block. That's fine. Over here, these settings that are down below, foreground and obscured lines, what I'm going to do is set these two by layer. So by layer for color, by layer for line type. Obscured lines, you'll usually want to have that off. So right now it's not checked on my screen. I would expect that for you as well. If you have obscured lines turned on, it's going to show you lines that exist through an object where you're not really going to see them. Like in this case, you would see the trunk of the tree, even though right now you can't see it because in 3D you're looking at the top of it. So obscured lines, we don't really use a lot of that here. But that's pretty much it. Once you have these settings set, you can hit create and it's going to draw a 2D full scale version of the object you have in 3D here. You can also go around and do what's called axonometric views, also known as isometric views in the realm of mechanical drafting. But you can do a flat shot of the corner of your view cube like this. Same deal, by layer, and node to obscured lines. You can hit create, and you can see that it will draw a axonometric view of that 3D item that you were just looking at. So kind of neat in that way. So if you're dealing with a furniture piece, a desk, an island, anything of that nature, maybe a bar, it's always a good idea to show one of these as long as you can and you have a model of that item. That way it gives the viewer more of an idea of what it is that they're looking at, and they can also kind of look around to see if there's anything that makes sense that they can't really picture off of a 2D view. So right now we've got a plan view and axonometric view here. We're going to also create some elevation views off of this as well. So we can do a flat shot of the front using the front of my view cube here. We'll do one on the side of this little house here too. And you can kind of see like where this is going, because when you have a 3D model, it does make things easier to be able to draw a lot faster in AutoCAD as long as you get really good at 3D modeling. But yeah, usually what I'll do is I'll kind of just spin my way around the object that I'm working on and take flat shots of each face of that object, kind of like what I'm doing here. I'll set those all next to each other in a row. And then when I'm all done, what I would do is kind of line those up on my my grid system in my AutoCAD template. Right now I'm working off a blank file, so I don't have that template. But yeah, so you can see I've got my plan view, my axonometric view, front, left, back, right. If I needed to, could also make a section view through the house here too. So let's do one of those just to play around with that idea. Go back to our home tab and we're going to go over to section plane. So there's two ways to really make a section in AutoCAD. This way is the way I prefer to do this, but there are other ways to do that, and I will show you both methods here. The first way, we're going to make a section through the window of our house. So to be able to do that, what you're going to do is click on section plane, and it's going to ask you for 2 points, to which I'm going to take 2 points that are going to intersect that window. You can see that it draws an imaginary plane in space like this. And if I click on that plane, my toolbar at the top does change. And I can go over here to where it says generate section block, and then this menu will pop up. So this is what it will look like by default the first time you start this command in AutoCAD. And these are the settings that you're going to want to have for that. So you want to say 2D section / elevation. And you're going to go down to this little caret down here for show details. And then you're going to go down to section settings at the very bottom. In section settings, this can be very intimidating at first. I would just, don't get too flustered by this and don't try to get too hung up on it. It's really not that difficult once you get into what these are. You can see there are 5 different drop downs here that you're going to be changing settings for. So the first one, intersection boundary. This is going to be any lines that are being cut through by the section plane. And I'll say that again, any lines that are being cut through by the section plane. So you're going to go to by layer. We'll pretty much change all of these to by layer. Now, this is kind of weird because I'm not working in a template, but you're going to set these to geometry for these lines here. So by layer, geometry. You don't have to mess with anything else in here. That should be all set to go. Down below, now you have intersection fill. Intersection fill, you're going to say yes to show. And this is basically going to be the hatching through the object that you're working on. So I will usually leave this on predefined solid, although if you were only hatching one thing, you could pick that hatch here if you wanted to. These can be changed later on though too. So again, intersection fill is basically just a fancy word for hatching here. So we're going to say yes, we want to see that. We're going to leave it on solid. Angle can be 0. We don't have to change that. I do want to change the color though to be by layer, and I want the layer to be my hatch layer, like that. The line type, instead of continuous, we will set that to by layer as well. And then that should be the only things you're going to want to change. So by layer for color, hatch for the layer, and then by layer for the line type. You can close out of that dialog box and move on to the next. So background lines. Background lines we do want to see. However, we don't want to see hidden lines. And background lines, what those are, is if I'm cutting through this window frame, we already talked about intersection boundaries that would include these lines here around that windowsill. It wouldn't include these lines back here though. So the vertical part of our windowsill would not be included as an intersection boundary. So that's where the background lines come in. These are going to be lines that you're going to see beyond the section plane. So that's the background line. You do want those turned on, but you do not want the hidden line part of it turned on. If you have the hidden line part of it turned on, it will show you lines like these, which are going to show up as hidden lines through your window, and it will look confusing to look at. You don't really want that. So we're going to say no to hidden lines, but yes to background lines. We're going to set the layer to geometry, the line type to by layer, and then that's all you need there. So again, just going over that, you can set the background lines to show, hidden lines to no, layer to geometry, and color to by layer, and line type to by layer. Once those are set, go ahead and close that out. These two ones that are shown in red by default, we actually never use these, and you can turn these off by just saying no to those settings there. So we do not ever want to see cutaway geometry, and we do not ever want to see curved tangency lines. So you can turn both of those off. Once you hit OK and hit create, then it will draw your section view. I'm going to set that down right there. Okay, so you can see exactly what we're seeing here is we are cutting through that windowsill. You can see that windowsill there, and you can see the beyond lines like the tree and these vertical lines of our windowsill beyond. That is one way to do a section view using the section plane method. The other way I'm going to show you here is a way that you can use. However, it's not my preferred way to do it, but that doesn't mean that you can't do this here. So let's say I'm looking at my house here, and I wanted to make a section through the door. What I could do is I could use the slice command. So I made a copy of the house first, and then I'm using the slice command to grab that point and this point here. And then I'm going to keep both sides. And then I'm going to delete or hide those objects there. Then what I need to do is isolate this part of the building. Go to the left side of my view cube, and then take a flat shot of this model here. So same settings as before, that shouldn't change. Take a flat shot of that, which will get you a section view through, and I'm going to unhide everything again, get you a section view through that door. So you'll see that it's pretty similar to how you get that same section view through the section plane. The only real difference there is that it doesn't hatch it automatically for you. And you can see that the layer for the lines is not on the geometry layer, it's actually on layer 0. Yeah, so there are some differences there. It's not incorrect to do it that way. It just, you still have to do some extra steps after you make that view. So to me personally, I don't like using that way, but you can use it though, and there's nothing wrong with that. So once you have all of your views, what you actually want to do is highlight these views. And what you're going to do is you're going to explode these views. They come in by default as a block. And when that happens, you can't modify them until you explode them. And so that's the reason why I'm doing that here. But now if I wanted to, I can go back to 2D wireframe, and I could actually plot a drawing off of this tiny house that we just built. So kind of a neat little way you can do that. And I'll have you practice that too, so that way you can do a little bit of practice modeling just with some basic AutoCAD commands just to get a feel for what that's like. It'll be a little clunky at first because you're not used to that, and it's kind of something that you're going to have to play around with to get like an understanding of how that works. So that's why I'm using this little kind of like Monopoly house model as a standard way to kind of jump into it first. In the next video, once you're comfortable with your 3D modeling, or at least the basics of 3D modeling, what we're going to do is we're going to get into die wall construction, what that looks like. what materials you're going to use to build those die walls, how they're constructed, um, and what the different types of die walls are used for, because there are a few different types that you're going to have to look at too. So yeah, so we'll go through that. And at least for this one, go ahead and practice the 3D model, and then we will move into die walls following this.